Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. I am your host, Harry Fling, and today we're going to be continuing a theme that I started in the last video with the one and only Dave Meltzer. Last time we talked about the worst work matches as voted. I kind of made a little mistake, not necessarily by him, but by the readers of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. But I guess Meltzer gets the final say, so I guess, maybe it is him at the end. But today we're going to talk about the most disgusting promotional tactics, another one of his Wrestling Observer newsletter year-end awards. Excuse me. So at the end of every year, people win awards for better or for worse. Now I'm here to shed some light on some of these awards for things that didn't go over so well, like the worst work matches. And now here we are with most disgusting promotional tactics. And what that means is stuff they did that came across as insulting, distasteful, very tasteless to say the least, very desperate, very attention-seeking, any of those adjectives you could use to describe. And WWE is very notorious for this, as was WCW and TNA. But I'm only going to talk about the WWE examples, and I'm not going to list every single one. We've had this award since 1981, and the first winner was this guy Tony Hernandez. And the most disgusting promotional tactic that year was him portraying a monster character in LaBelle Promotions. And I didn't do a whole lot of research, don't know much about LaBelle Promotions. I can only imagine it was Gene LaBelle. That's Daniel Bryan's finisher, the LaBelle Lock, which later became famously known as the Yes Lock. So that's my only knowledge there, backstory I can give you. I guess it was a character that didn't go over too well in an indie promotion or whatever, and that's how it got voted. So, but the examples I'm going to give are a lot worse than this, because WWE can get desperate, especially for ratings, so they'll pull things out of their ass that might not be things that the audience likes per se, especially the casual audience. And even me as a diehard fan, I know where to draw the line. You got to draw the line somewhere as far as, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable socially and politically and everything else all encompassing. So we're going to look at a few examples, and we'll start with 1991 here. And I'm going to go in chronological order, but I'm going to skip some years. The winner for 1991's most disgusting promotional tactic was exploiting the Persian Gulf War. That brings us back to early 91 with the Iraqi sympathizer character Sergeant Slaughter. Slaughter had returned to the company in the summer of 1990, right when the Gulf War, I believe, had already started or was already in the midst. I'm not great when it comes to world history, so if I'm a little skewed on the details, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I admit my mistakes. So the Gulf War was going on during this time, and Sergeant Slaughter returned to WWF. I hadn't been seen, I think, since 1984. He'd been in other promotions. He was an all-American hero, G.I. Joe. Sergeant Slaughter at ease. Now he comes back, and he's not wearing his typical, sergeant hat, his drill sergeant hat, and he's wearing these, what do you call those sunglasses? Ray-Ban sunglasses with with either a crew hat, or he's wearing what the Sheik of Araby would wear, Lawrence of Arabia. And he's also wearing Iron Sheik's camel clutch, Iron Sheik boots, and he uses the camel clutch as his finisher. So he's really gone all full Benedict Arnold on us by this point in time, Sergeant Slaughter, that is. And Slaughter, just a little fun fact before I go any further, he used to live in Weston, Connecticut for a short time. I think it was sometime in the 90s. Sergeant Slaughter lived in Weston, Connecticut, which is where Paul Levesque and Stephanie McMahon reside now. So, anyways, we get to this feud, and he starts feuding with Nikolai Volkov, who I believe had just turned face at this time. Volkov broke away from Boris Zhukov and the Bolsheviks, so he was part Russian, part American, and Sergeant Slaughter didn't like that he was taking on anything American, because Sergeant Slaughter's a turncoat. But it wasn't until 91, and this was the tail end of 1990, it wasn't until the beginning of 91, we get to the Rumble in Miami that year. Slaughter wins the WWF title from the Ultimate Warrior, and Hulk Hogan wins the Royal Rumble that year. Slaughter, because people couldn't blur the lines back then, and we didn't have any internet back in 91. I was only 2 years old, so I was really not in the know, but I researched all this stuff later. We had no internet. We did have the Wrestling Observer newsletter. It maybe didn't break as much kayfabe, but I think mostly people read Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which kept kayfabe in their literature. So Slaughter could not go anywhere in life with his wife or kids, his family or friends. He had to wear a bulletproof vest for fear he's going to get shot anywhere he goes. He was treated as, like the next Saddam Hussein. Oh my God. Can you imagine just going places back then and actually people ripping into you? How could you fucking do this? You turn on our fucking country like that. So he was afraid he was going to get shot, poor guy. Now, at the Miami Arena for the Royal Rumble that year in 91, Slaughter stayed until 3 in the morning. He didn't want to leave the arena right after the show because he was worried fans were going to shoot him, stab him. He had his bulletproof vest on, and fans were outraged that the Warrior lost. Warrior was kind of an American hero. Every face was portraying red, white, and blue American hero, in contrast to Slaughter's Iraqi sympathizer gimmick. So, fans were outraged. And again, people know how wrestling works now better than what they did in 1991. So he was worried a whole mob of fans were going to attack him outside the Miami Arena. That's later became the AAA and whatever the hell it is now, where the Miami Heat play. So he waited till 3 in the morning. He got in his rental car and went straight back to the hotel. He made it safe. And then Hulk Hogan gets involved in the feud because, Hulk Hogan's very patriotic All-American and finally decides to challenge him for the WWF title at WrestleMania 7. Now, this was before the meaning of winning the Royal Rumble meant you get to face the world champion at WrestleMania. That didn't matter back then. It didn't happen until 93. So Hogan, naturally, because he's not the champion, he's going to challenge for it. So they have an okay match at WrestleMania 7. Definitely not one of the greatest main events. But the exploitation is that we had a lot of our brave men and women fighting overseas in a very serious war against a very serious dictator who was a threat to many of us, Saddam Hussein. We caught him in 2003, and then he got executed. That was the war in Iraq, though. And they treated it like it was just one big joke. I mean, I was only 2, so obviously I didn't think much of it as a little kid then. But as an adult looking at this, you think, we shouldn't be making jokes about wars only because there's a lot at stake in all seriousness. And, if things didn't go well after the Gulf War was all said and done, we wouldn't be talking about this angle right here, right now. So, yeah, definitely not one of the brighter spots in WWE history. But there's worse, in my opinion. So this is bad, but I think it only gets worse. 1996, this one's kind of mild compared to other ones. The one that got the award in 96 was Fake Razor Ramon and Fake Diesel. And this was just because they kind of insulted the audience's intelligence. Audience had gotten smarter by that point. We had the advent of America Online, and people were starting to read more dirt sheets, albeit it took 15 minutes, 20 minutes to load a goddamn page back then. Hard to believe everything works so fast now. So, Jim Ross, they were doing a whole heel character with him, the whole heel angle with Jim Ross, who decided to tell the fans over the summer of 96, during the summer of 96, Razor Ramon, I have it on good authority that Razor Ramon and Diesel are on their way back to the World Wrestling Federation. And Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler looking like, how do you know that? Where did you get that silly idea? So, we go to President Gorilla Monsoon via satellite, and he was the kayfabe president after Tunney retired, and he says, both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash will not be returning to the World Wrestling Federation as they are currently under contract with another organization. And he left it at that. So I apologize to all the fans who have been misled by one Mr. Jim Ross. Jim Ross, I don't know what information you have, but Razor Ramon and Diesel will in fact not be returning to the World Wrestling Federation. That being Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Where were they? WCW, forming the NWO. We're not going to get into that. Come September 96, we're introduced to some doppelgangers. Razor Ramon is now fake Razor Ramon, and he's portrayed by the late, great Rick Bogner. Rick Bogner wasn't the greatest wrestler of all time. He might have been okay on the indies. I think he died in like 2017. Rick Bogner looked almost identical to Scott Hall, except he wasn't as muscular, wasn't as toned, a little pudgy down here. And the accent was almost accurate, but came off as very fake. Hey, yo, take a look at the bad guy. You knew it wasn't Scott Hall. And then Glenn Jacobs, better career as Kane, who previously came off as Isaac Yankem character, portrayed fake Diesel. There wasn't much talking from Diesel. It sounded like the way Kane would talk in a promo when he was unmasked. It's the best imitation I could do. Their matches were okay, but the fans were just booing them every week. I mean, they were already heels, but they were booing them more so because we know this is a complete joke. We know where Hall and Nash are. We'll just change the channel and watch WCW instead. We don't need to watch these doppelgangers. This is insulting. That was the mindset for most fans. I was only 7 when this happened, so I just took it as face value. Okay, so they're fakes, because I know the other two are in the other company. My brother cued me in. We all know what's going on. Come on. So they weren't long for this world of wrestling, fake Razor and fake Diesel, so they were out the door right after the Rumble in 97. I think they spent some time in USWA for a while, and then they feuded, where fake Razor defeated fake Diesel. Bogner left the company while Jacob stayed, and the rest is history when he became Kane. So that's it. We're going to put that one to rest. 1997, most disgusting promotional tactic. This is another exploitation, but it has to do with a death, and this is where it gets too serious, because WWE doesn't know when to respect the privacy of those who've passed away and their loved ones. Brian Pillman unfortunately passed away October the 5th of 1997. I can't believe that was 28 years ago. I remember watching In Your House Bad Blood with 2 Ds, not the 0304 version or the 2024 revival with 1 D. Brian Pillman was set to face Dude Love in a singles match. He was already involved in an angle with Goldust and Marlena, the Pillman Files, long been forgotten. He died of a heart attack the morning of October 5th in his hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota. I believe Bad Blood was live in St. Louis, was taking place in St. Louis that year. So they were in Bloomington, Minnesota the night before for a house show, and I guess they were going to drive down south or to the Midwest. I don't know their travel schedule arrangements at the time. So, unfortunately, the match never takes place. I don't know, Mick Foley probably didn't do anything that night, wrestling-wise. The next night on Raw, we do a nice tribute. But then it gets kind of ugly because Vince McMahon, still announcer at that time, a month before Montreal happened, decides to interview Melanie Pillman 24 hours after her husband just passed. For God's sakes, give the poor woman some time to grieve. She's in mourning. You don't do that to somebody right after their loved one just died. Jesus Christ, if that were me, I'd have been... Oh my God, they'd have had another thing coming with me. So Melanie is looking all sullen and very disenfranchised, as she would, because her husband just passed, and Vince is asking her all these questions about drug-related things and injuries. She doesn't need this right now. This could have waited to another time, or not even do it at all, even. Oh my God, it was just insensitive to do this. Very insensitive. That Melanie Pillman interview the day after Brian Pillman dies. Ugh. It's tasteless. I'm sorry. It may look like a classy move, but it's not. She should have never agreed to it. And Melanie, unfortunately, if you watch Brian Pillman's story on Dark Side of the Ring, her life took a tailspin after this. She had a very serious drug problem, and I think she got sober now, but her kids wouldn't talk to her for many years, and physically she looks like a mess. She's trying to rebuild what she lost. So the wrestling world can be sad, folks, and this is a true story right here. Unfortunately, this next one doesn't get any better. It's another death, and this one's very sensitive to me because this is somebody who I have respected for so long. 1999 winner of Most Disgusting Promotional Tactic is continuing Over the Edge pay-per-view after Owen Hart had just died. I wasn't the biggest Owen Hart fan when I was watching, and he died when I was 10, but I've gone to respect Owen so much over the years. I'm going to put him in my top 10 when I revise my top 50 favorite male wrestler list of all time, and I have a separate one for the females. Owen was a genuinely good person in real life. It was so sad that he died at 34, very young, the tragic accident. We're not even going to get into the whole backstory. Go watch Dark Side of the Ring if you want to read into that, or read the Wikipedia page, whatever. So, Owen was one of those just down-to-earth guys that everybody wanted to be his friend. Nobody ever said a bad thing about Owen. He was never in a bad mood in front of anyone. He never drank. He never took any drugs. He always saved money while he was on the road to provide for his family. And, you know, it's just a down-to-earth person. You know when you meet one of these people, and if you can have somebody like that in your life, you're very lucky. So, and Owen was a great athlete, too, and a great performer, notwithstanding. So there's nothing bad you can ever say about Owen Hart. Now, the fact that they continued the show after he died was, need I say more? Somebody just died, and you wheeled him out of the ring and send the next guy out for his match. Jeff Jarrett and Deborah had to go on after, and they were in tears. Fucking tears. Jeff's trying to get through a promo. Owen, I'm praying for you, buddy. He's pointing to him, and they're getting themselves composed as they walk down to the ring. It was a mixed tag match. Jeff Jarrett and Deborah taking on Val Venus and Nicole Bass. It was Nicole Bass's only pay-per-view match on Over the Edge of all places. And I remember watching that. My brother's walking back and forth. We were in our porch. It was an indoor porch, and we had a TV. He's walking to our living room where our parents are watching the news, or 60 Minutes on a Sunday night, and we're flipping back and forth to see if this story had if gotten wind by other media outlets and broken on the news. So, yes, there were a lot of news outlets that reported about the wrestler that died in the ring, but the fact they went on with the show speaks volumes to Vince's character here, that he doesn't always consider, the families or the loved ones affected by these situations. I mean, if they had stopped the show right then and there, I'd have been more than okay with it. And I'm sorry that I continued to watch the show after that, and I was 10 years old. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people thought it should have continued. I think it had a lot to do with pay-per-view contracts. They had a contract with the pay-per-view provider, so they needed to fulfill their obligations to provide a 3-hour show that people are paying $30 for. At the time, it was $30 for a pay-per-view, maybe a little bit more for WrestleMania. That's one reason. And then, I guess, Vince has this show must go on mentality, and other people may agree or disagree with that. In this case, the show shouldn't go on. Then there's also an argument people made, and this was in Vince's documentary on Netflix, which came out a year ago. If Shane had fallen, or Stephanie had fallen 75 feet above the ring, they would have stopped the show. And he said, no doubt. And I guess Vince's excuse in all that, when confronted, was like, well, we didn't know the circumstances. They sent him to the hospital. But with 75 feet, that's tragic. Somebody will die falling like that. And of course, Jim Ross is burdened with telling us what's going on, and then finally breaks the news that Owen Hart has died from that fall, and it got ugly. And then Martha Hart and suing the company, and the whole estrangement with the Hart family. We're not even going to get into that, but yeah, it definitely deserved to win. Most disgusting promotional tactic that year. We'll skip over to 2001. This one does not involve a death. Well, it does in a sense because 9/11, but more so what the comparisons are. 2001's winner of Most Disgusting Promotional Tactics, Stephanie McMahon, comparing her father's indictment to 9/11. If you thought Owen Hart's Raw was hard to watch, personally I think this is the hardest SmackDown to ever watch. It's the hardest WWE show to ever watch. I will not go back and watch this one. I was affected by 9/11. I lost an older brother who was also 34. So you can imagine what I was going through as a 12-year-old. And being in Connecticut, they were showing coverage of the aftermath of 9/11, so we didn't get any regular scheduled television programming for at least a week. So we couldn't watch it till after the fact. And my brother was in school at Salve Regina in Newport, Rhode Island, because they weren't so close to New York. They were able to get SmackDown that night. It was at the Compaq Center in Houston, Texas. The ropes were decorated red, white, and blue, like back in the day. Jim Ross and Paul Heyman were on commentary instead of Michael Cole and Taz. Vince comes out dressed casually in a button-down short-sleeve shirt, and everyone's got their American flags. They're saluting. Lillian Garcia sings the national anthem, which she wasn't prepared for. They were supposed to fly to another city, but all the flights were grounded because of the terrorist attacks. So they went from San Antonio and Raw the night before to Compaq Center, I think in Houston, I believe it was. Houston or Dallas, I can't remember. So they were in Texas. Very patriotic show, a lot of sad patriotic overtones. Kind of sad undertones, only because we know all of what just happened. So all the wrestlers, much like on Owen Hart's Raw, were given time to speak about their thoughts regarding the current situation with the attacks on the World Trade Center. Stephanie uses this as an opportunity to compare that to when her father got indicted back in the early 90s in federal court, in Supreme Court, I believe it was, when the feds tried to arrest my father for the steroid trial. This is just as bad. Just the words she used to compare it. It's disgusting because you're talking about a fucking steroid trial, and Vince's life wasn't at stake. He was just going to go to jail and have to serve a long sentence, and that probably would have put WWF out of business. That's different because 9/11, people lost their lives. I'll never see my brother again till it's my turn to go upstairs. So you can't compare those two. It's very disgusting. I take personal offense to this one. It's a story that did need to be shared on such an emotionally charged episode of SmackDown, no less. It could have easily waited. No, this shouldn't even have been brought up at all. But she should have, if she had anything to say, she should have just, had apologies, prayers, thoughts, things like that. Not compare it to when her father got indicted in federal court. That we didn't need to hear about that. And I hadn't even heard about the steroid trial yet. I was only 12 years old. Didn't have all the wrestling knowledge and research under my belt like I do now at 36. So yeah, it's bad. 2002's winner. This one's disgusting. It's gross. Triple H accusing Kane of murder and necrophilia. Ugh, necrophilia is when you have sex with a dead body, for what it's worth. I don't know how the concept of this was ever made. This was a kayfabe thing, but a storyline very distasteful. So Triple H accused Kane of killing this girl named Katie Vick. Katie Vick was like a high school sweetheart of Kane's. They went out after homecoming, supposedly, or the prom one night. I think Kane might have had too much to drink, or she did. And they got in a car accident, but Kane survived, but Katie did not. And then Triple H takes it a step further. He goes to a funeral home, and they set up a casket with a dead cheerleader's body in it. Ugh. It's just a dummy in there. It's a mannequin. Okay. And Triple H wears a Kane mask with a black t-shirt and jeans, as he always did. And he decides to commit necrophilia inside the fucking casket, and this is being filmed on national television. Fortunately, he didn't take off his clothes, but the suggestive remarks he's saying over this mannequin, it's supposed to be a dead body, and he's climbing over like he's about to have sex with her, and ugh, so disgusting. And I'm glad that YouTube has really taken this down. It's not something I ever want to go and watch again. Even at 13, I thought to myself, okay, this is very unconventional. This is very tasteless, I'm sorry to say, because there's nothing funny about it either. Who the fuck ever thought in their mind that this was funny shit? This isn't funny. I'm sorry. Making out with dead bodies, and you're joking about murder too. Murder's not a joke. Shit like this happens a lot in our world, in our society, and I'm sorry, but certain things they gotta know when to toe the line in the sand and say, okay, for our viewers, we better not do this. But Vince doesn't think like that. I'm glad he's finally gone out of the company. McMahon, I'm talking about. He's a genius in many ways, but there's a lot of skeletons in the closet. There's some not so good things that he's done, and this is one of them. 2003 is a little more mild, but it's just annoying more than offensive. The winner of 2003's most disgusting promotional tactic, McMahon's all over the product. If you were to watch 2003, Monday Night Raw, Shane and Linda McMahon were kind of running rampant in that whole Eric Bischoff and Kane storyline. It was when Kane unmasked, and then he tombstoned Linda, and Shane wanted to get his revenge, but then he had to go through Eric Bischoff first, and too much time was focused on the McMahons on Raw. Same for SmackDown. Excuse me. Vince and Stephanie McMahon were all over SmackDown. SmackDown's GM was Stephanie McMahon at the beginning of the year. And then Vince, ever since the whole Mr. America storyline, Vince took offense at what his daughter was doing as far as running the show. And that was actually a bad storyline. And Stephanie was getting ready to marry Hunter, so she needed to be taken off television. This was the excuse to do it. So they have this father-daughter I Quit match where Vince was just brutally attacking his daughter, and Stephanie seemed so vulnerable, and I think it was the first time people really cheered for her as a face since before she dumped Test and joined Triple H. So people hated Stephanie for so long, were finally on her side when they saw what her father was doing. Just berating her and, making out with another woman in front of her, that being Sable. Vince and Sable were trying to be a hot item on the SmackDown roster in 2003, before she married Brock Lesnar. And finally, Vince choked her out with a lead pipe, and Linda threw in the towel, and that was it for Stephanie as SmackDown GM. Then Paul Heyman took over. So it seemed like every week on Raw and every week on SmackDown, there was always a McMahon involved in a storyline. I guess it could even go back to Hogan McMahon, their feud leading up to WrestleMania 19, which I've touched on a little bit in past videos. So I guess I didn't notice this one too much, but looking back, it's a lot of times for the McMahons being on television. We have other great talent that could be used on TV. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one. We're going to move on to the next one. We're going to go to 2005. This one's bad because of the timing. Muhammad Hassan was a very controversial character, as you know. He was a Arab American who felt discriminated against, who felt he and his people were being discriminated against since the attacks on the World Trade Center of 9/11. Again, an angle they probably shouldn't have put on TV so soon after this had happened. We're only 3 or 4 years removed by this point. Mohammed Hassan terrorist attack angle aired on the day of the London terrorist bombings. And this was 2005 winner for most disgusting promotional tactic. Yeah, so he was feuding with Undertaker, and then terrorists come in, choke him out with piano wire. That was just bad, and that kind of fucked over Hassan there. So I'm not going to go into too much on that. Watch Dark Side of the Ring. 2011, the Be a Star anti-bullying campaign, which I liked, but it was hypocritical because Jim Ross was constantly getting mistreated by guys like Michael Cole and John Laurinaitis on TV regularly, and even Vince McMahon to a lesser extent. They were promoting this campaign. They were already in the thick of the PG era against bullying, because I suffered bullying a little bit, when I was in school, and so I know what kids today go through with that. And bullying should never, ever be allowed, in all seriousness. Put a stop to it. So I'm glad WWE took the action to kind of help those kids, but what they were presenting on TV didn't reflect it, so that made it disgusting. So, yeah, it was a failure in the long run. 2014, they insulted fans who purchased pay-per-views instead of WWE Network for $9.99. It was a blessing to have the WWE Network in 2014. It saved money on buying pay-per-views, and more than half the time the pay-per-view wouldn't go through, depending on your cable service. I had fucking Comcast. They suck. Yeah, so I was happy that they had it, but they didn't need to say, okay, I can't believe there are fans out there that don't already know this. Guys, it's only $9.99 for the WWE Network, only $10 a month. It sounded like they were insulting them in the sense that, why spend extra money on a pay-per-view? Like, I get that they're trying to point them in the right direction as far as buying something cheaper, but, don't make them feel bad for it. Maybe there's people that aren't diehard fans like me and maybe don't want to watch stuff from the past and only want to watch what was current at the time. So yeah, they could have done without that. We got 2 more I'm going to cover here. From 2018 to 2019, and this one won it just last year in 2024, WWE's current working relationship with Saudi Arabia. Now, I don't like it because it's a country that doesn't treat women right. For many years, since WWE started the Greatest Royal Rumble and Crown Jewel that year in 2018, they didn't have any women on the show because of, the fact that women don't have rights in that country. And now that when they do, they have to wear these silk bodysuits. They're all covered up from head to toe. At least they don't have to make them wear a hijab or a burqa or anything. Everybody should have freedom in every country, in my opinion, man or woman. I believe in women's rights, even though I'm not a woman. So I don't believe there's any gender roles or anything like that. And there's some countries that just haven't developed socially, progressively like we have. So I don't like that WWE is working with Saudi. Their contract with Saudi is up in 2030, so we still got another 5 years. So Crown Jewel just sucks as a show in general. Didn't even watch it this past weekend. Don't care about it. The last one I'm going to cover here for most disgusting promotional tactic brings us to is another shared one, 2020 and 2021. During the COVID pandemic, WWE firing talent during the COVID pandemic while setting profit records. They fired like 15 or 20 people at least between those 2 years, and they didn't need to because they were still, doing well financially despite the pandemic taking its toll on other businesses. And I work in healthcare, so I didn't suffer too much and got, paid well, compensated well for my time working during that awful period. But WWE really didn't need to let so many people go. The one person or 2 people that was a blessing they let go, and that's because they're doing so well in the Indies, are Curt Hawkins and Zack Ryder. Especially Zack, because the whole Matt Cardona, King of the Indies, it's really working out well for him. Been following Matt Cardona, saw him at Slammiversary back in July. Same for Curt Hawkins, now goes by his real name, Brian Myers. They're doing so well, and I follow them on Facebook, and, what can I say? That was a blessing in disguise for them, but everyone else can't say the same. I think like Keith Lee, I think Andrade might have been part of that, and he ended up coming back. Kairi Sane, then she ended up coming back. There were so many other names, I'm not even going to get into it. So you see the trend here with WWE and the most disgusting promotional tactics. Now, there have been other companies that have won this award. Like in 2000, WCW won it for David Arquette as their world champion. Need I say more about that? Or go back to 98, Scott Hall, exploiting Scott Hall's alcoholism. Need I say more? You get why these things are tasteless. So I think I've said enough, and see for yourself. You can be the judge of what you think these angles represent. Let me know in the comments what you think, and this has been another great edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. I am your host, Harry Fling, and until next time, everybody, bye-bye.